لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا وحبيبنا وإمام المتقين ما بعد. So inshallah ta'ala, I'm continuing and hopefully concluding matters related to the manners of the carriers of the Quran. The topic that is mentioned now is آداب القراء عند تلاوتهم القرآن ومما لا ينبغي لهم جهله. Matters related to the manners the person should have when they're reciting the Quran. Of the things that's mentioned, يعني لمن أراد قراءة القرآن في ليل أن whoever wants أن يتوضأ القرآن, the person glorify the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and purify himself, use the miswak, purify their mouth as they're using the mouth to say the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This shows that a person holds the Quran in high esteem. Because some people think respecting the Quran is putting it in the top of my wardrobe or the highest point in the bookshelf, where most times that's where it collects the most dust. La. The glorifying of the Quran is that a person purifies himself when reciting it, knowing that the angels also come near to that person when they're reciting the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So a person won't eat garlic and the likes, for example. Not eat things that will give unpleasant smells, knowing that the angels are going to come and present themselves around you whilst you're reciting the Quran. The same way, for example, when you're sitting with your friends, you wouldn't like that your breath smells. You don't like to have a foul smell coming from your breath. I'm not talking about the fasting breath. The fasting breath, alhamdulillah, we bear that with patience for the sake of Allah. It's rough, but alhamdulillah. The thing that keeps you going, you know that it's pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But any other day, you wouldn't want to get that close. Alhamdulillah for Islam. You can just imagine some of the backgrounds you come from, you wouldn't even hesitate to hot someone up because of their breath. But now, subhanAllah, because something is beloved to Allah, even if you hate it, you find a way to love it. Even though it's like unbearable at times. You remind yourself this is loved by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I got a hack though, you know, the brothers when you're wearing your iqad, don't shave off your moustache completely, so you can put some oud there. Alhamdulillah, it helps. Also, of the things that's for the one who's reciting the Quran, to read abundantly from the Mus'haf. As Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, he mentioned, another fil Mus'haf ibadah. Looking at the Mus'haf is worshipping of itself. Also, of the things that is mentioned, to read from the Mus'haf in Tahara. He also mentioned أن يقرأ في المصحف على غير طهارة فلا بأس به ولكن لا يمسه. Of the things that's mentioned, if they want to read the Quran and they're not in a state of purity, no problem, but don't touch it. That's of those who say you can't read the Quran from the Mus'haf unless you're in a state of tahara. But again, it's highly encouraged to ensure that you are in a state of tahara, to show that you're giving that due importance to the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Also, the thing that's mentioned, whenever they read the Quran in the Mus'haf and they pass by the ayat and there's a sajda, that they perform sujood. Sometimes out of laziness we'll avoid it, but it's better to do so. As I mentioned in the hadith, إذا قرأ ابن آدم السجدة فسجد اعتزل الشيطان يبكي يقول يا ويله أمر ابن آدم السجود فسجد فله الجنة وأمرت بالسجود فعصيت فلي النار رواه أو أخرجه مسلم. This hadith, subhanallah, is sufficient for you to always want to make sajda, because of the number one enemy we have, and that is shaitan. It mentioned, the Prophet said from hadith of Abi Hurairah, whenever the Ibn Adam, the child of Adam, reads a sajda, a place where there's a sajda, and performs sujood, shaitan begins to weep. He becomes unable to do anything, starts crying, weeping. And he says, woe to him. He was commanded, the child of Adam was commanded to perform sujood, and he made sujood. So for him it will be Jannah. I was commanded to perform sujood, but I disobeyed. For me it's the hellfire. That's what Iblis is saying. When you recite and do the sujood, al-recitation, هذا الحديث يكفي. This hadith suffices us to do that. Whenever you pass by the ayat that there's a sajda, usjudu, ta'deeman lillah, as a means of glorification of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, worship of Allah azza wa jal. Knowing this is the impact it has on Iblis, that he was reminded of what is going to happen to him because he decided not to prostrate. And that's affecting his weeping, because he knows the hellfire is certain for him. But what makes it worse? Because you did not prostrate. You did not make that one sujood that he was commanded to do. Also, for example, if there's someone who, let's say you're walking on the pathway and you're reciting and you come across an ayah of sujood that you signal with your head. Whilst you're walking on the pathway and you're reciting, reviewing or something, and you pass by an ayah of sujood, then you still make that you put your head down like this as a means of intention of sujood. Also, when they're reciting, that a person contemplates, يتدبر في قراءته. Not just reciting, but without any thought. That you're contemplating on the Quran. You're thinking about, what does Allah mean here? What lessons can I take from this part of the Quran? So it's not just mujarrad qira'at al-alfaz. It's not that you're just reading the words of the Quran. Rather, you're seeking to take heed, benefit from the meaning. Also, as did the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, when you pass by ayat that mention Jannah and the likes, ask Allah, ponder, ask Allah for Jannah. When you talk about ayat of punishment, seek refuge in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Ayat of rahmah, ask Allah for His mercy. Ayat of tasbih, sabbih. Ayat that glorify Allah, that free Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from all imperfections and the likes, and say subhanallah. هكذا كان يقرأ النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم. This was the way the Prophet recited. That if you come across an ayah mentioned Jannah, he will stop and ask Allah for Jannah. An ayah mentioned the hellfire, he will stop and ask Allah to save him from the hellfire. Also, if you're yawning, for example, إذا تثاءبت وأنت تقرأ فأمسك حتى يذهب عنك. If you're yawning whilst you're reciting, stop reciting until the yawn finishes. Don't be yawning and trying to continue to recite. Hold back yourself. When you finish yawning, then you go back to reciting. Also, if you start to fall asleep, lie down and sleep, if needs be. Don't continue to recite, because maybe they say you want to start seeking forgiveness, but you start cursing yourself. Because sometimes when you're in that stage of dozing off, you're not able to comprehend exactly what you're saying. And you start like mixing ayat and the likes. So all of these things you're cautious of. Now. Qatada, he mentions, لم يجالس هذا القرآن أحد إلا قام عنه بزيادة أو نقصان. No one sits with the Quran except they either leave with an increase or a decrease. As based on the statement of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah mentioned شفاء ورحمة للمؤمنين ولا يزيد الظالمين إلا خسارة. The Quran is shifa, a cure and a mercy for the believers, and it does not increase the wrongdoers except in greater loss. So either you're increasing iman, or you're increasing your loss and loss of iman, loss of any benefit in the hereafter. This comes down to the relationship a person has with the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And a person contemplating, because as we know, كما قال in the Quran, حجة لك أو عليك. The Quran is proof for you or a proof against you. Also, of the last thing that's mentioned is حسن الصوت بالقرآن. A person beautifying their voice with the Quran. عن براء بن عازب عن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم زينوا القرآن بأصواتكم. He mentions beautify the Quran with your voices. And when you recite the Quran, recite it in a beautiful way. And the way to beautify the Quran is بالأحكام التجويد. Learning the rules of tajweed. How to recite the book of Allah Ta'ala. As was mentioned in the Prophet كان يمده مدا. كان يمد مدا. When it was elongation, he would elongate. Now, Quran with tajweed. Not singing. Not with maqamat. هذه من البدع. ولو كانوا يفعلون أئمة الحرم. Even if the imams in the haram they do this maqamat, this is innovation. Doesn't mean it's permissible. One guy, stay away from him. Umar, Hisham or something like this. Don't listen to his recitation of Quran. Auto-tune, all of this stuff. It reminds me this is why you know it's a problem. When I hear the likeness of that recitation, it reminds me of songs of a Muslim. He mentioned من لم يتغنى بالقرآن فليس منا. Whoever does not beautify their voice with the Quran, they're not from us. It is from the ways of the Muslims to beautify their voice with the kalam of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And every single one of us has the ability to learn tajweed. And it's an obligation to recite with tajweed. It's not an obligation for you to know it theoretically to be able to teach it, but it's an obligation to recite with it. It's an obligation to recite with ahkam of tajweed. That's why it said to the person, a companion of the Quran in Yawm al-Qiyamah, اقرأ وارتقي ورتل كما كنت ترتل في الدنيا. Read and ascend and recite with tartil, which is tajweed, just as you used to do in the worldly life. Now, so a person beautifies their voice with the Quran. As Allah says, وَرَتِّلِ الْقُرْآنَ تَرْتِيلًا. You job with the Quran, tajweedan, beautify your voice when you're reciting the Quran. How does one beautify the voice? With a teacher learning the ahkam of tajweed. Learning the ahkam of tajweed, the sifat al-huruf. There's certain characteristics that each letter has. Those letters that are heavy and the likes. Also learning, for example, what is called miqdar al-harf, how long it takes to pronounce the harf, the letter itself. We have something called ikhtilas, when it's like you snatching, you steal from the haraka. There's some words you can't say fast, you have to slow down. Like wa'ada, ya'idu. You don't say ya'idukum, like ya'idukum. There's a way to say it. You won't learn this except that you recite to a teacher. Sanasimuhu, sanasimuhu, la. Sanasimuhu. There's a way that you have to learn how to say certain words in the Quran. Or in Surah Yusuf, la ta'manna. Stuff like this, you have to move your mouth like this. There's two ways you say this. La ta'manuna or la ta'manna. You see, I move my lip but nothing is said. You see, you learn this with a teacher. You don't learn this by yourself. You have to learn how to beautify your voice like this when you recite Quran to a teacher. Also, of the ways that the Quran is beautified when it comes to recitation is by way of the qira'at. A person learning the different modes of recitation, qira'at. So there's different ways that the Quran is recited. For example, you hear someone says Maliki Yawmiddin or Maliki Yawmiddin, or someone saying Mu'minun and someone saying Mu'minun, stuff like this. Okay, some of these are examples of the different ways that the Quran was revealed. All of these ways the Quran was revealed in them. That's why two of the companions, I think it's Abdullah bin Mas'ud and Umar al-Khattab, were disputing in how one verse was being recited, and they went back to the Prophet and he said, both ways is how it was revealed. Both ways was how it was revealed. And from what I can recall, about 9 of the qira'at go back to Ubay ibn Ka'b. They trace it back to, majority of the qira'at go back to Ubay ibn Ka'b radiallahu anhu, who Allah named by name the Prophet to recite Surah Al-Bayyinah to him. So this is not something that is from innovation, but you'll find some people, they will say, if the Imam was reciting in a different way, they say, you made a mistake. That's because they don't know. You see. For example, you hear Ibrahim, but then someone says Ibrahim. You're like, what? Nah, this is how it was revealed. You see. And it shows you the beauty of the Quran and the miraculous nature of the Quran. Or when you hear, for example, فَإِذَا جَاءَكُمْ فَاسِقٌ بِنَبَإٍ فَتَبَيَّنُوا. But you hear the next time he says فَتَثَبَّتُوا, you're like, he changed the whole word. هَكَذَا أَنزَلَ اللَّهُ تَعَالَى الْقُرْآنَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed it with both words. فَتَبَيَّنُوا and فَتَثَبَّتُوا. A different qira'ah. So a person learns the beauty of the Quran like this. فنسأل الله يجعلنا من أهل القرآن فهم أهل الله وخاصته. اللهم آمين. وبهذا we finished in general the mukhtasar of that book. Inshallah ta'ala. After Asr, شوية, we'll start الدعوة والدواء بإذن الله تعالى. بارك الله فيكم وصلى وسلم على نبينا حبيب محمد وآله وصحبه أجمعين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.